My husband agreed to an open marriage, then vanished without a trace after I took the first step. Hey Reddit. My husband, Jake, and I had been married for 8 years, and for the most part, I thought we were happy. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like any couple, but nothing that made me think we were on the brink of collapse. That's why I was so shocked when, one night over dinner, Jake casually suggested the idea of opening our marriage. At first, I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he just looked at me with this serious expression and said he had been thinking about it for a while. He told me he loved me but felt like we had fallen into a routine, and he wanted to explore outside our marriage without jeopardizing what we had. I was stunned. I had never even considered being with anyone else, but the way he framed it made me feel like this was something he needed. He reassured me that it would be fair, both of us could see other people, and there would be full honesty and transparency. It wasn't like he was trying to replace me. He just wanted something more. I wrestled with the idea for weeks. Part of me was hurt, wondering if I wasn't enough for him. But another part of me thought that maybe this could be good for us. Maybe he was right. Maybe this would shake things up in a way that would bring us closer in the long run. So, after many sleepless nights and long conversations, I agreed. We set ground rules, full honesty, no getting serious with anyone else, and always prioritizing our marriage. At first, nothing really changed. Jake didn't seem to be in a hurry to act on it, and honestly, neither was I. But then, one night, I met someone. His name was Eric, and he was charming, kind, and made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. I told Jake about him immediately, following our rule of honesty, and he just nodded, acting completely unbothered. He even encouraged me to go on a date with Eric, saying that it was the whole point of opening the marriage. So, I did. That first date turned into a second, then a third, and before I knew it, I was genuinely enjoying my time with Eric. He made me feel desired in a way Jake hadn't in years, and I started to realize how much I had been missing affection and attention. The strange thing was, while I was honest about everything with Jake, he never once told me if he was seeing anyone. Every time I asked, he'd just shrug and say he hadn't met anyone worth pursuing yet. I felt guilty that I had already found someone, but he reassured me that it was fine. He wanted this, after all. Then, one morning, I woke up, and Jake was gone. At first, I thought he had just left early for work, but when I checked my phone, there was no message. I went downstairs, and something felt off. His keys weren't on the counter where he always left them. His shoes were gone. I went back upstairs and opened the closet. His side was empty. Panic started to rise in my chest as I rushed to check our bank account. That's when I saw it. He had drained it. Every last penny. Our joint savings, my personal checking account, everything was gone. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I didn't understand. This wasn't just a man walking away from a marriage, this was a planned disappearance. He had wiped out our finances, packed his things, and left without a trace. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, my mind racing with questions. Had he planned this from the beginning? Was this his way of punishing me for actually going through with the open marriage? Or had he met someone and decided to start over? I went through every possible scenario in my head, but none of them made sense. If he wanted out of the marriage, why not just say so? Why steal everything from me? I checked our home office, looking for any paperwork or clues, and that's when I realized something even worse. His name was the only one on the lease for the house. I had moved in after we got married, and I never thought twice about the paperwork. I had trusted him. Now, with no money and no legal claim to the house, I was completely trapped. I reached out to his family, his friends, anyone who might know where he was. No one had heard from him. Some of them seemed genuinely shocked, while others gave vague, dismissive answers that made me think they knew more than they were letting on. Days passed, and I started getting notices about missed payments. Our bills, our mortgage, everything had been left in my hands, but with no money, I had no way to pay. I tried to reach out to the bank, but since everything was under Jake's name, I had little recourse. It was like he had set me up to fail, ensuring that when he left me with absolutely nothing. I felt humiliated. I had agreed to open our marriage because I thought it was something we were doing together, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that he had orchestrated this entire thing as some sort of twisted revenge. And the worst part? I still had no idea where he was. Every night, I lay in bed staring at my phone, hoping for a message, a clue, anything. But the silence was deafening. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer. A divorce notice. Jake had officially filed, and in the paperwork, he claimed I had been unfaithful. He painted me as the villain, stating that my infidelity was the reason for the dissolution of the marriage. I felt sick. I wanted to scream. He was the one who suggested this. He was the one who pushed for it. And now, he was using it against me? I had no money for a lawyer. No way to fight back. I was completely cornered, and he knew it. But I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I didn't know how, but I was going to find him. I was going to make him answer for what he had done to me. Because this wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was something else entirely. And I was determined to uncover the truth. What I didn't know was that the truth was far worse than I ever could have imagined. Update. After my initial shock wore off, I knew I couldn't just sit around and let Jake get away with this. I started digging, determined to find anything that could lead me to him. I checked our shared email account, but it had been wiped clean. I tried logging into our bank accounts again, but my access had been revoked. It was like he had thought of everything. But then I remembered something. Jake had an old backup email address that he rarely used, one tied to his college days. On a whim, I tried logging into it using an old password he had given me years ago, and to my surprise, it worked. Most of the emails were spam or useless, but then I found something interesting, several emails from a travel agency confirming flight tickets and hotel bookings. My heart pounded as I read through them. He had booked a one-way flight to Mexico weeks before we even had the conversation about an open marriage. Not only that, but there were emails from an offshore bank confirming transactions. Jake hadn't just left, he had been planning this escape for a long time. I was furious. All this time, I had been agonizing over whether I had done something wrong, whether agreeing to the open marriage had pushed him away. But now, it was obvious, he had set me up. He had manipulated me into agreeing to something that would make me look like the bad guy when he finally disappeared. He wanted to leave, but he wanted to do it in a way that made me look like the reason why. And on top of that, he had taken every cent we had, leaving me with absolutely nothing. I took all the evidence I had to the police, hoping they could do something. But because Jake had left voluntarily and we weren't in immediate legal battles over assets, they said there wasn't much they could do. The best they could offer was advice on getting a lawyer to fight the financial aspect of it. But that was the problem, I didn't have the money for a lawyer. Then, something else happened. I started getting messages from an unknown number. At first, they were vague, just one-word texts like "Hey" or "Miss you." But then they became more sinister. "I know what you're doing. Stop looking. You won't find me." It was him. It had to be. But what shook me the most was that he still had access to my accounts. He knew I had been looking into him. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything over and over again in my mind, trying to figure out what kind of man I had really married. Another update, I refused to stop looking. If anything, the messages only made me more determined. I started reaching out to people I knew Jake had done business with in the past, hoping someone might know more. One of his old coworkers mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Jake had been talking about disappearing for months before he even mentioned the open marriage to me. Not just disappearing, but leaving everything behind, including his identity. I knew I had to act fast before he completely vanished. I contacted a private investigator, explaining my situation. It took every last bit of money I had left, but I was desperate. A week later, the pie came back with more than I ever expected. Not only had Jake left the country, but he wasn't alone. He had been involved with another woman for at least a year before he left. She had gone with him. This changed everything. He hadn't just wanted an open marriage, he had already replaced me long before he even brought up the idea. The open marriage was nothing more than a setup, a way to justify leaving me in financial ruin while he started over with someone else. But then, the pie found something even more disturbing. The woman Jake had run off with? She wasn't just some random fling. She was the wife of one of his former business partners, a man who had once accused Jake of stealing from their company before everything mysteriously went quiet. I had never paid much attention to Jake's work drama, but now I was starting to see a pattern. Jake hadn't just abandoned me, he had been planning something much bigger, something that felt less like a bad breakup and more like a full-blown con. That was when I decided I couldn't just let this go. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Final update. I knew I needed to go after Jake legally, but I also knew I needed proof that would hold up in court. With the help of the pie, I was able to get enough documentation to prove that Jake had been funneling money into offshore accounts long before he left. But I needed more. I needed something undeniable. That was when I remembered something, our home security cameras. Jake had always insisted on having cameras around the house for safety, but he had been the one who managed the system. I hadn't thought about them until now, but when I checked the account, I found something shocking. The footage wasn't just still there, it had captured everything. The night before he disappeared, Jake had been on the phone with someone, packing his bags, going through financial documents. And then, I heard it. His voice, clear as day. "By the time she figures it out, I'll be long gone. She'll have nothing, and no one will believe her." That was all I needed. I took the footage, the bank records, and everything else I had collected and went back to the authorities. This time, they took me seriously. Not only was Jake now being investigated for fraud, but the FBI got involved once they discovered the extent of his financial dealings. It turned out he hadn't just drained our accounts, he had embezzled money from multiple business ventures. He hadn't just been planning to leave me. He had been planning to disappear from everyone. It took months, but eventually, the authorities tracked him down. He and his new girlfriend had been hiding out in a small coastal town, living under fake identities. When they arrested him, he looked shocked, like he never thought I would have the ability to fight back. But I did. And I won. In the end, I got justice. Jake was charged with multiple counts of fraud and financial crimes, and he faced years in prison. The money he stole from me? I didn't get it all back, but enough of it was recovered that I was able to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and the scars from what he did will probably never fully go away. But I came out stronger. Jake thought he could break me, leave me with nothing, and disappear into a new life without consequences. But he underestimated me. And in the end, he was the one who lost everything.